Week 15 of the NFL season is officially in the books, so in today's video, I'm going to give my honest thoughts and reactions to every single game of week number 15. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button, but let's hop into it. And we are going to begin with our Thursday night football matchup between the LA Rams versus the San Francisco 49ers. In terms of the actual game on the field, there wasn't a whole lot of memorable moments. This was a defensive slugfest where both offenses were just not playing very well at all. Deebo Samuel really struggled. I don't think Cooper Kupp caught a single pass. Give credit where credit is due. Matthew Stafford was able to put together a couple nice drives in the second half to put up some points. But for a game that was only a bunch of field goals, there was a lot of stories that did come from this game. The biggest, of course, being the Devondre Campbell situation and, of course, the Deebo Samuel situation. My thoughts on the Campbell situation is that I don't think he should ever play an NFL snap ever again. In my personal opinion, when you sign a contract and when you're out there on the field, you have an obligation to play for the players next to you, and he didn't do so. I thought it was, like Charvarius Ward said, a little bit of some sucker stuff. But hey, it happened. I don't think he'll ever be playing with the San Francisco 49ers moving forward. And as it goes to the Deebo Samuel situation, it's just unfortunate. He's getting older. He isn't the same player that he used to be. I kind of doubt he's going to be on the team next year. Then we move over to the Washington Commanders versus the New Orleans Saints game. Now, the New Orleans Saints came into this game with Jake Haener as the starting quarterback, but that did not go well at all. On the day, Jake Haener was 4 for 10 for 49 yards and an interception. Eventually, he would go on to get replaced by Spencer Rattler, who performed slightly better, but not necessarily much better. On the day, Spencer Rattler was 10 for 21 for 135 yards and 1 touchdown. I think the moral of the story about this game is that Washington kind of played with their food a little bit too much in this one. They had a pretty sizable lead heading into halftime, 14-0. They kind of got comfortable, and they didn't put away what is a not so good Saints team. The Saints just kind of crawled their way back, made a couple of nice plays here and there, kicked some field goals, scored some touchdowns, did some nice things until eventually they got down to the touchdown late in the game, had a chance to win it with the 2-point conversion, and didn't get to go. For Washington, I'm not necessarily too worried about this one because they've played better football lately, but at the same time, there's no reason why you should even be coming close to losing to Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener. Whereas on the other side, I will say I am really impressed with how much this Saints team is actually fighting for their head coach. They aren't just giving up, they're still playing for their coach, and I don't know, maybe there is something that we can take from that. But then let's go ahead and move on to the Chiefs versus the Browns. Now, this was unfortunately the version of Jameis Winston that we don't want to see as NFL fans. This is the version of Jameis Winston that throws a bunch of interceptions, has bad pocket presence, doesn't read the field properly, and just makes a bunch of boneheaded throws. And that's exactly what we got today. Eventually, he got replaced by Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and well, it wasn't that much better either. So for the Browns, defensively, I thought they played pretty well, but offensively, they had absolutely no juice on the offensive end outside of a couple runs from Jerome Ford, but really nothing was going well. Shout out to Jerry Jeudy. He did have a good day. Whereas on the other side, the Chiefs also didn't have the greatest day offensively, but they were able to put together about 1 or 2 drives in each quarter that were good drives that were able to actually move the ball down the field. They scored 21 points, so it wasn't like this was some sort of great offensive performance, but you will take it given how this Chiefs offense has been as of late. Mahomes was okay, 19 for 38, which is kind of crazy, for almost 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. He did go down with an ankle injury, so hopefully he's going to be okay moving forward because this team is obviously trying to compete for a championship. I would not be shocked if they were to rest him for a week and let Carson Wentz run the team next week just to get him fully healthy for a playoff run. But at the same time, I wouldn't also be shocked if he plays through the pain like he does the past couple years. Not a lot to take from this game. The Chiefs are a good team. The Browns are a bad team. So, of course, the Chiefs won. And then let's go ahead and move on to the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Tennessee Titans. I kind of hate to say it, but I really wish the Bengals are going to make the playoffs just because I think they're such a fun team offensively when they are really going with Joe Burrow moving the ball down the field, with T. Higgins making plays and staying healthy, with obviously Jamar Chase. And whenever they have a decent ground game with Chase Brown, that offense is just so much fun to watch. It's just unfortunate that the team kind of is in too big of a hole, and it's extremely unlikely that they are going to make the playoffs. In this game, we saw a Will Levis disaster class. He was 8 for 12 for 89 yards and 3 interceptions. He eventually got replaced by Mason Rudolph, who actually was pretty good. Now, granted, he was good against what is a really bad defense in Cincinnati, so take that as you will, but I will give him his flowers. He actually had a pretty nice day. These are two teams that really have nothing to play for. It was honestly actually a really fun game if you just kind of got to to sit there and watch it. It was a much more entertaining game than honestly I expected. It was a fun, high-scoring game with a lot of turnovers, a lot of interceptions, lots of fun, big explosive plays, and yeah, it was just a fun football game. Also a pretty good football game for fantasy football owners. And then kind of on the polar opposite spectrum of what was a fun game to now not so much of a fun game between the Houston Texans and the Miami Dolphins, the Houston Texans offense is just really in a bad place right now. For starters, CJ Stroud, I wouldn't say he was bad today, but he wasn't good. Like, when our expectations for Stroud coming into this year was potential MVP, All-Pro, Pro Bowl level guy, that just really hasn't been the case this year. On the day, he was 18 for 26 for only 131 yards and 2 touchdowns. They had basically no rushing game the entire day. Joe Mixon had 12 carries for 23 yards. Their leading receiver was Joe Mixon for 5 catches for 33 yards, which is pretty crazy when you have Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, and of course Nico freaking Collins. Now, I will say Miami does have a really good defense that is opportunistic, has some really good star players. So, of course, I wasn't expecting some massive day, but at least like to have seen 200 yards from CJ Stroud. Regardless, though, if you look on the other side, the Dolphins were even worse offensively. Because the positives that you could say about the Texans offense was that they were clean with the football. Sure, they got sacked a couple of times, but they didn't throw any interceptions or have any massive turnovers. Whereas for the Dolphins, like, yeah, it was just that type of day. Tua had 3 interceptions, had a bunch of really bad throws, just was playing like how we've kind of typically seen this Dolphins team play when they're in these situations versus actually good teams. In my opinion, this was a pretty big missed opportunity from Miami. This is a Texans team that is not playing good football, and your defense had a really good day, but the offense just absolutely crapped their pants and they lost another game versus what is a pretty good team. I'm not sure if this number is exactly correct, but I think Tua and the Dolphins are like 3-15 versus above 500 teams. This was a moment to potentially rewrite the script, and they didn't do so, even though that their defense played really well. Moving to the Ravens versus the Giants, really nothing to talk about with this one. Lamar Jackson had 5 touchdowns, looked utterly ridiculous, and maybe is the frontrunner MVP, though I do think there's another quarterback later in the video that might have an argument against him. Derrick Henry wasn't necessarily fantastic, but he was efficient. Whereas on the other side, Malik Neighbors had himself a pretty nice day, but the Giants offense, it was just pretty bad the entire day. I mean, it was a beatdown. The final score was 35-14, but it felt like 60-0. And then moving forward to another weird game that has no playoff implications, really means absolutely nothing, but was still, for some reason, really fun to watch. And that was the Jets versus the Jaguars. The Jets are 4-10, the Jaguars are 3-11, so you would think that both these teams would want to tank to potentially go up there and take a Travis Hunter or Tetairoa McMillan or some, star quarterback, but no, both these teams actually played pretty damn well football today. Aaron Rodgers, who played really good last week, continues his streak of good games, has another good week this week, and Mac Jones, who hasn't been good at all these past few weeks, was actually pretty good outside of the 2 interceptions. Not a whole lot of really good rushing attacks. I thought the defenses were at times pretty good, but just one of those games that was oddly fun, and watching that Jets offense actually function can be really fun to watch sometimes, even if they're not necessarily a good team. When that offense does get rolling, it's actually a really fun offense when Aaron Rodgers is just really clicking, especially with Devontae Adams. I don't know if Aaron Rodgers will be back next year with the Jets, but I kind of hope he does, because I would really like to see this team actually get a full run with Aaron Rodgers leading the way with a new head coach. I know Rodgers hasn't been good this year, but these past few weeks have given me a bit more hope about that team, so I don't know, just something to think about. But next up, we had the Dallas Cowboys versus the Carolina Panthers. The Dallas Cowboys pretty much dominated the majority of the game. It was a bit of a slow start for them, but once they kind of got the ball rolling, things were really going their way. And truth be told, if it wasn't for a crazy touchdown to end the first half from Bryce Young, I think the final score would be a little bit more of a blowout. Cooper Rush, though he missed a couple throws, had himself a pretty nice day. Also, Rico Dowdle has been really good and is kind of lobbying himself to potentially be the starting running back for this team next year. I know that's not going to be popular for Cowboys fans, but I think this is 3 straight games where he's had over 100 yards. Now, granted, he's been doing this against some really bad defenses like Cincinnati and Carolina, but, hey, a run is a run, and he's still getting lots of yardage. CeeDee Lamb also had a nice day, and there's reports out there that Mike McCarthy could be back next year, which I'm not sure how to feel about that, but let me just be honest. For Carolina's side of things, this was a massive step back for Bryce Young. He wasn't terrible today, but those interceptions were pretty rough. One of them, I believe, was a tip pass, so it wasn't really his fault, but you would still like him to play a lot better. at the end of the day, these are two not so good teams. The Cowboys won, but this is going to hurt them come draft time. This is a team that should be wanting to draft a top 10 player. Ashton Jeanty could fall to them, so it's not the worst thing in the world, but I think this team would honestly be better off if they lost this game. I thought Carolina was going to play better. They did not. Both sides of the football just looked pretty bad and pretty uninspired. So yeah, Dallas won, and it'll be interesting to see what happens for the future with Mike McCarthy, and even now with some rumors about Micah Parsons being traded, which, God, I hope not, because the Cowboys would be so stupid to do so. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt. I'll be really quick, but I have started a brand new YouTube channel called Metro Stories. On this channel, we simply focus on actual stories of NFL teams and NFL players. So if that sort of stuff interests you, make sure to go ahead and check it out. It'll be in the description below as well as in the pinned comment. Go ahead and check it out. I think you might like it. Let's get back to the video. And then we begin our 3 o'clock games between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the LA Chargers. I was expecting a really close game, but it turned out that Tampa Bay dominated this one. Now, granted, in the first half, it was a really close game, but in the second half, it just felt like LA lost a lot of their juice, and then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers really just started to beat down on them. We'll begin with the Buccaneers side of things because I do think that's a bit more of the more fun side to talk about. Baker Mayfield was awesome on the day. He did have one interception, but I thought outside of that pick, he had a really nice day. Mike Evans comes back these past few weeks, has been dominant. This week, he was awesome, and so was also Bucky Irving, who is just such a nice, young, juiceful, that's not a word, but just gives so much juice to this offense, and I just really love seeing this offense click. I hate the fact that their defense isn't that good, because if that defense was legitimately good, this could be an actual Super Bowl contender, but right now, they're more like a first or second round exit. But man, when Baker Mayfield's clicking like this, that offense is so much fun to watch. But then their opponent, the LA Chargers, I'm very disappointed in them. I did suspect the Buccaneers were going to win this one because of just how banged up that team is. Ladd McConkey came in with some injuries. Herbert came in with some injuries. No J.K. Dobbins. So I did expect that Chargers team to struggle this week, but I thought the defense would really keep them in the game. But the defense really got cooked in the second half. It was a really almost outlier-like performance because the defense has just been so solid the entire year. Getting 40 bombed from the Buccaneers was not on my bingo card. So yeah, that was disappointing from the defense. For the offensive side of things, it was ugly. But again, with all the injuries, I kind of suspected it. No J.K. Dobbins has really tanked their offense. I don't know if he's going to come back to end the season, but that team desperately needs him. Without that rushing attack, the offense just really struggles. Herbert doesn't have the outside weapons to really move the ball down the field. So yeah, this is a bit of a worrying game, and maybe an even more so of a wake-up call for what could be done in the offseason to fix some of their issues. And then let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts versus the Denver Broncos. Early on, the Indianapolis Colts were in control of things. It looked like they were going to find a way to open up a sizable lead. Jonathan Taylor looks like he's going for a touchdown, drops the ball at like the 1 yard line, and then the Denver Broncos from that point moving forward just kind of dominated the game. It's unfortunate because Jonathan Taylor is like a 3 or 4 year veteran at this point, should not be making those mistakes. Those are high school and college level mistakes, and he made a massive one, and I think it ultimately kind of cost the team the game. Anthony Richardson just hasn't looked good. I hate to say it because he's a young developmenting piece, but I don't really know what this Colts team is going to do moving forward. They're 6-8. They're probably not going to make the playoffs. In fact, I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. They're really talented and have so many good players. And I just don't think that this team can really afford to wait another 2, maybe even 3 years to wait on the development of Anthony Richardson, especially if we're not 100% sure that he's actually going to be any good. Yes, he's got a strong arm. He's got some good legs, but he just doesn't read the field as good as what you would like him to do, and he's just kind of an injury risk as well. I'm not sitting here and saying that you should quit on him right now. I don't think that's the case. I think you give him another full season or off season and another full season next year and kind of make your decision at that point. But I don't know. It's becoming a little bit worrying at this point because he just has been far too inconsistent, and this week he just wasn't good enough. Again, I don't want to blame him too much because that Jonathan Taylor turnover was inexcusable, and it's something that is out of his control. It's out of the head coach's control, and I do feel like it kind of cost this team the game. Because heading into the fourth quarter, the Colts actually held a lead. They were looking like they could potentially win the game. Despite the bad play from Anthony and the turnover from Jonathan Taylor, they were looking okay. Then the fourth quarter happened and Denver started to run up the score. They dropped 21 in the fourth quarter and ultimately won the game pretty handedly. Bo Nix probably had his worst game in, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 weeks at this point. He had 3 interceptions, only 130 yards, but he also did have 3 touchdowns and did lead the team in rushing. So this this is a type of performance that isn't very good, especially for his Offensive Rookie of the Year odds, especially when Jaden Daniels had himself a pretty good day. But when it comes down to it, a win is a win. They are now 9-5, and the defense is awesome. Bo Nix typically plays better than this, so yeah, they're probably a top 10 team at this point, and they could pose some sort of threat in the playoffs. And then we move forward to the Arizona Cardinals versus the New England Patriots. I don't feel like I have to say too much about this one because when it comes down to it, the Cardinals are kind of in their second step of the rebuild, whereas the Patriots are in their first step. The Patriots really have very, very limited talent, very limited personnel. Drake May is a awesome young rookie quarterback that I am really excited to see his development, but he just doesn't have the weapons. He doesn't have the offensive line. He also just doesn't have the defense. It just doesn't really bode well for a young quarterback to win games, which, by the way, isn't a bad thing. This team should want a top 5 pick to go out there and take a Travis Hunter or a Ted McMillan or some really good, awesome player to add to this offense. So because they lost, it's not the end of the world. It just kind of sucks to see Drake May on the sideline looking so sad because he's balling, man. But on the other side, the Arizona Cardinals, this was a pretty dominant win. I don't think the final score really indicates how dominant of a performance it was. They owned the majority of the game. Eventually, the Patriots were able to put together some drives to make the score look a little bit more respectable, but the Cardinals played a pretty fine day. James Conner was dominant. Trey McBride, please get that man a touchdown. I desperately could use it in my fantasy championship next week, but he had himself a nice day. Kyler Murray, no touchdowns, but 23 for 30 for 224 yards. Pretty good day, all things considered. They still have a chance to potentially win the division, especially with Seattle's loss today, but I think it's a little bit unlikely because the LA Rams are playing some really good football, and I just don't know if the Cardinals have the talent to actually win the division, so we'll have to wait and see. Anything could happen. But let's go ahead and move forward to the main events of today's video, the Detroit Lions versus the Buffalo Bills. 48-42, I think 90 points scored, and I want to say on the day total over 1,000 yards were done. So as you can tell, not a lot of defense. Really, the only defense that was actually played today was from the Buffalo Bills in the first really quarter or so, and that's kind of what separated them from winning and losing. The Lions had a bit of a slow start, and after that, they were really good offensively, but because of that slow start, they were behind the 8 ball, they couldn't run the ball that much, and yeah, they lost the game. Jared Goff, though, was 6 yards away from 500 yards and had 5 touchdowns, yet he still lost the game. Whereas on the other side, Josh Allen had 362 yards and 2 touchdowns and a bunch of rushing yards too, and he won the game. Josh Allen had an MVP-like performance. It was almost clinical in a way. Now, I do want to say this, the Lions were really without a bunch of really key players on the defensive side of things, so take that into account. Not to mention, again, it was a slow start for them in the first quarter, so they couldn't run the ball effectively. I think if they could redo the game plan and be fully healthy, I do think they would fare a lot better in this matchup because they just couldn't run the ball as much as they wanted to, and I think a big reason why was because of how bad the defense was for the Detroit Lions. With that all said, though, the Bills were dominant, and it was almost clinical in a way. It felt like whenever the Lions were in a situation where they could make a stop and maybe start to mount some sort of comeback, the Bills just made some really good play and got a first down or scored a touchdown. There was just a number of times where the Bills could have, floundered and they could have struggled, but they just didn't. They made the right plays every single time, and it got them the win. This was a very impressive victory. In fact, I would say it's probably the most impressive victory of the season from any team. With that said, I'm not worried about the Detroit Lions. You gave up 48 points to a really good team, and sure, your defense, you had a lot of starters out there, but they were missing a couple key guys out there, and I think if they could redo it, they would do a lot of things differently. I'm not too worried about it because they still had a chance to win it potentially late if they got that onside kick, so it wasn't like it was a 50-0 blowout. This was a 48-42 game that had a kick gone your way, who knows how the game would have went. I think Buffalo's clearly the best team in the NFL. They can drop 40 points while also being a good defense. I will say, I don't really know how sustainable scoring 40 points and giving up 40 points is. I don't think that's going to happen much moving forward, but I want to see their defense play a little bit better, and then I'll feel a bit more comfortable about claiming them as the number 1 team. But based off their track record, they've beaten the Chiefs, they've beaten the Lions, they're the number 1 team in the NFL. And then potentially the second main event of the day, the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Philadelphia Eagles. This one wasn't as much fun as the other one. First half was actually a pretty fun game, going to halftime 17-13. And then the second half happened. The Philadelphia Eagles kind of really held their own and eventually did win the game. the Steelers just offensively did not have. Of course, not having George Pickens out there kind of limited their passing attack. They didn't really run the ball that effectively either. So it was just a rough day for the offense for Pittsburgh. I'm not too worried about it because, again, you don't have George Pickens, and Philadelphia might have the best defense maybe in the NFL. If you look at the AFC, like, yes, Kansas City has a great defense, but I think Pittsburgh could easily have success against them. So I'm not too worried about this offensive performance from Pittsburgh because they're a good offense. They're just missing their best receiver, and I think if they could redo it, their offense would run the ball a bit more effectively. So I'm not too worried about it, though at the same time, this game wasn't terribly close come the fourth quarter. Philadelphia kind of destroyed them the entire day. I was questioning Jalen Hurts and his passing ability, hence why I picked Pittsburgh to win the game, but I was wrong. Jalen Hurts was dominant passing the ball today, made a couple really nice throws. Him and AJ Brown kind of got back on track. He had 8 receptions for 110 yards and 1 touchdown. They didn't even have to really rely on Saquon that much. He actually didn't have that great of a day, yet they still dominated the majority of the game. No turnovers really for Jalen Hurts in the offense outside of, I believe, a fumble. So obviously you want to clean that up, but I was pretty impressed with Philadelphia. They dominated a really, really good Pittsburgh team. I mean, Pittsburgh had really nothing going offensively. So yeah, Philadelphia is one of the best teams, if not maybe the best team in the NFL. They just dominated a top 10 Pittsburgh team. So yeah, I mean, this is a good showcasing of who they actually can be moving, and it will definitely make me sort of reconsider them as legitimate championship contenders. And then lastly, we have the Green Bay Packers versus the Seattle Seahawks. Now, I am recording this Sunday night, so we have 2 Monday games. I won't be able to actually talk about them in this video, though I will have 2 community posts for each games, kind of talking about my opinions as well as asking you guys a question that you guys can answer. So if you guys do want to see that, just check out my community tab. I'll have that posted on Monday. But going back to the Packers versus Seahawks, the Packers dominated the game. Let's just be honest. Even when Geno Smith was playing, the Packers were up 14-0. Not saying the game was over at that point, but once Geno Smith did come out of the game, which by the way, I do hope that he is okay. I believe it's a knee injury, which is obviously very concerning, but if the Seahawks team wants to win the division and wants to make the playoffs, they've got to have their starting quarterback healthy. It was just a dominant performance from the Packers. It was kind of a comfortable performance from them as well. They really had no fear of Sam Howell or any of those guys for the Seattle Seahawks. With no Geno Smith, there was just nothing really threatening the Packers the entire day. And in fact, the second half was honestly kind of boring because it just kind of felt like we were inevitably going to get to a point where the Packers were going to win the game. It was just kind of waiting for the moment where the Packers put together a drive to put us out of kind of our misery. It was just one of those games where once the starting quarterback went out, we all knew what the outcome was. We just wanted to actually see it happen, and eventually it did happen. Green Bay was dominant. They ran the ball well. Jordan Love played pretty well, and their defense played really well as well. That's a lot of wells. Whereas for Seattle, again, no starting quarterback. They really stood no shot. So yeah, am I concerned about Seattle moving forward? Well, yes, if Geno Smith can't become healthy, that's a massive concern. But in terms of what I saw on the field, I'm not terribly concerned because, again, you didn't have your starting quarterback, so you really didn't have a fair shot. But for Green Bay, hey, you finally beat a good team this year. Green Bay hasn't really beaten a whole bunch of 500-plus teams, so getting this win had to feel nice. Real quick, before I actually end the video, I did just want to talk about my predictions video. As you guys can see, I got a lot of the predictions right this week. I currently have a record of 148-74 when it comes to predicting these games, so I think that's a pretty good record. But if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers, so please hit the subscribe button. But I love you guys. Peace.